Welcome back to part 2 of our series where we are exploring custom functions inside of Power Query. Alrighty, so previous video we talked a little bit, well, we didn't talk a little bit, we talked a lot. We talked about the JSON file that we were going to be loading into Power Query to get the information that we needed to basically set the stage for the next portion of this series. So the second portion, we're going to focus on building a custom function that's going to, in essence, duplicate what we were doing here, but we're going to take it one step further, and we're now going to make it focused on doing a web request. So two different things. Basically the same step, but now instead of coming from a document, we're going to be coming from a web request. And on top of that, we're then going to leverage this function into the original data set that you're seeing in front of you. So that's the plan. With that being said, let's jump back into Power Query. Alrighty, so if you haven't, go to Data tab. And then you can just go to Get Data and then launch Power Query Editor. I gotta get my notes. There it is. Alrighty. Custom functions. This is for fun. So I'm going to rename this one really quick. I'm going to call this data source. Okay, perfect. And then from here, we're going to create a new blank query. So we're going to say new query from other source, and then you can just go down to blank query. That was magically symmetrical. I've never done that with a drop-down menu in my life. That was insane. That was like perfectly symmetric, like down, left, right, down. All right. Okay, so we're going to open up our new Power Query Editor. Again, I apologize in advance if it's hard to read. I would recommend for probably these few videos, put it in full screen mode. Additionally, the code will be available on GitHub. Or if you're like me, put it on the TV. Okay, so first things first, we are going to make this a custom function that's going to have an input. So the first thing, if you want to make it a custom function where it's an input, then all you need to do is you need to specify your little curly brackets or curved brackets up front, the name of your argument, and you can also give it a data type. So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, give me a URL, and I do expect it to be text. If you don't put anything there, it's just anything. And then also you can say, I think it's here, optional. I gotta remember where it's. I think maybe it's in front of here. Maybe it's that one. One of these, if you put optional, then you're basically saying I don't need it to run this function. But if you add it, then it's obviously going to do some more operations. And then you want your equal sign and then your right arrow. And then from here, it's just like any other query that you've ever worked with. It's literally the same exact thing. So to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like, now it just changes the user interface. That's literally all it does. So again, it looked simple, but now it just changed the entire user interface. Okay, so then from here, we're now going to start making our particular request. Now, I'm going to be cheating here a little bit, and I'll explain that when I get there. We're going to be grabbing a URL. We're going to be grabbing a URL, so that's going to be sending us some content in the form of web content back to us. And that web content just so happens to be a JSON string. So we're going to take the web content, which is a JSON string, and then we're going to load that into a JSON document that we can then use as our source of data. So we'll start inner and then go outer. So we'll say web contents. And then from here, we need to specify the URL. In this case, it's going to be whatever was passed in through the function. And then there's some options. Now, in this case, it's going to be a record, and this one is going to be headers. Now, the only reason I know I have to do this was because it did not work without it. So this particular API is a little bit weird. It's not surprising. It's run by the government, so things that should work never work. But basically, we have to do this like really interesting header ones that normally you wouldn't have to do, but these ones apparently you have to. So in other words, you're going to basically pass through a record, and that record is then going to equal another record, and that record's going to have two fields, accept and then accept language. And each one of those is just going to be set equal to these. Again, it's just more for expecting what content's supposed to be coming back. But if you don't do this, it will give you an error and it will not work. So it's very important that you understand that if you do not have these headers in here, I will tell you right now, they will not work. So now what does it look like? Well, let me get a URL and we can see what happens. See, I already have it. And you guys were like, oh, Alex, you don't have it. Where is it? Okay, here we go. So you put it in, and then you invoke it. Well, now it's just nothing. I mean, it's literally nothing. It's just binary content, so it's not super helpful. But at least showing that it's working. So then from here, we need to take it one step further, and now we're going to do our JSON and then document. So we're going to pass through our content, and then this is going to technically be our document. I know that's kind of weird to think about, but again, you're just passing the content from one step into the next step. And then from here, I'm going to do that. And now we should see a JSON document. So now it's definitely more readable, but now we have a record, and that record is simply, it's basically like a dictionary from Python, but it's going to be, the key is files, and then that files equals a list object. So from here, it's going to look very similar to what we were doing in our previous video, which is, oh, sorry, not this one, which is basically just expanding certain things, cleaning up some stuff and all that. So grab the URL and store it in a JSON document. This is really kind of a nice thing to know, is how to take one from the other and making sure that the content you're passing along does it, because now you're giving yourself the capability to do bulk requests at once. And you'll see that in the near the end of this video. So convert it to a table. We've done this before. So convert to table, record to table, and then we're going to pass through that source step. Make sure you put your comma. We'll do, since this one's kind of just like the last one, I'm not going to show every single step again. We'll expand that list column. So expand the list column. Well, that's really just our value column, but I'm lying here a little bit. We'll call this the expand column step. This will equal table. We're then going to call that expand list column method or function. We're going to do the convert to table step as our input. And then we're going to say, hey, take that value column and expand that one. And then from here, we're then going to, okay, this is where I'm going to stop it. Just right there. So let's see what it looks like first. Okay. Looks good, right? Nothing fancy, nothing crazy. Looks fine. So now we're going to do a little bit of trickery. That's at least what I call it. Because I want to make this more dynamic. Because remember in our previous video, so this one right here, there was a really kind of frustrating thing, right? The expand records one. I don't like this one, because if you look at it, I got to know all the names. So I have to manually type all that out. What if they change? So what we're going to do, and this again isn't necessarily perfect, but it's going to show you just a trick or two. How can we make this more dynamic? Well, if we go back to what the result looks like currently, we know that each row has a record, and we know a record is made up of fields and values. So really, all I need is just the field names for each record. And I know they're all the same because I know that's just how the JSON data is structured. So if I can get just one of the record's field names, I can use that as my basis to expand my columns. So what I'm going to do is some trickery. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to define a new step. This one is grab the record field names. So now we're going to do some selection. So we're going to call this step record field names. This will equal record. I'm going to do that field names function or method. And then I'm going to take my previous input. And then right now it's a table, right? I know it's a table. I want the first row from that table. And then what's going to be sent back to me is now a record. And from that record, I want the value field. So let's see what this gives me. Couple steps there, but now we have a list of the field names. A list of the field names. Might not seem like much, but it's really nice that we're just able to do that. I take a table, I select the first row. When I get a row back from a table, that's considered a record object. And then I want the value field of that record object. The value, which is just going to be another record. And then I'm going to return the field names from that record. We will explain what we will do with this in a second. So now we're going to expand the record column. Expand table equals table. Table. Expand record column. I'm going to take the expand column step. So I'm skipping. I'm not going to take that record field one just yet. I'm going to say expand that value column. And what do I want the field names to be? Well, that's simple. We already have the field names, don't we? Ah, that's the trick, huh? So now I don't have to pass through the list. I can just take the record field names that I had from my previous step. Ooh, I see what you did there. Let's see what this one gives us. Ah, so now we just made it more dynamic. I love when things like this work out because it makes your life easier. Okay, so we're going to keep on with this little exploring things. From here, I'm going to be doing a couple different things. So the first thing is I'm going to grab the first column name. This one is first column name equals table, column names, and then I'm going to say expand tables. Now keep in mind, this returns a list. I'm going to select the first row from that list, or first element from that list. This returns a list. I'm going to select that first element of that list. Let's see what we get. I get a string. Ugh, it's just a name. Ooh, what others? Okay, and then from here, I'm going to rename the table, or rename, the columns. So rename the columns. This will equal renamed table. Call this step rename table. Table. Rename columns. Expand table. And then I want the first column name to now be folder name. Rename table. So it should convert it from name to folder name. Ba-bum. Doing pretty good. I'm liking it so far. And then from here, we're going to kind of do basically what we were doing in the previous one, which is we're going to parse that date time column. Now, again, just for simplicity, since we've already done this step, I'm just going to show you what it looks like. All we did is we did exactly what we did in the previous video, which is we take the step, the previous one, we specify the column that we're going to be adding, since we're adding a column, and we're going to say, okay, for each row in this table, take that formatted last modified time value in that row, convert it to a date time, and then make sure that column has a data type of date time. Barring no spelling errors, we should have some output. Beautiful. So now everything looks good. So not perfect, but we're definitely, getting there. So I'm just going to do a couple things. So invoke request. I don't know. I'll just call it invoke request function. I'm just going to call it that. And then I'm going to call this one request function. Now, of course, that I've renamed it, I'm going to screw up everything because, of course, I named it differently. With that one, though, now we can go back to our previous one. So where do I have it? I don't need that one. I don't need that one. I do need this one. Okay, so we're going to go back to our data source query, and we're going to start doing an extra step here. Okay, so what do I want to do here? Well, in essence, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to first convert all the data types, and then I'm going to add a new column. And what I'm going to do with that new column is I'm going to grab each one of these URLs and make that request. So I'm going to basically apply this function for each row in this column. And then ideally, if we know that that function returns a table, I should then have a new one that's basically just a column of table objects. That's at least the plan. So the next one is cleaning up the names. We're going to do the data types. Now, data types, I've talked about this one, I can't tell you how many times. So again, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through explaining that step again. I'm just going to kind of just walk through it really briefly, and I'm not going to type out a million different names. So all we do is we call the table object transform from column types. Transform column types. The input is simply the previous table from our previous step. And then it's just like the rename function, where the first argument is the column that we currently have. And then we specify the type that we want that column to be. So in this case, I'm saying, hey, category needs to be a text data type. Folder name needs to be text. Label needs to be text, text, text. And then is folder flag. That one is simply a logical one. So that one is simply true or false. So again, before we go on to the next one, let's see what this outputs. And again, it's also good to just do it just to make sure you're not, freaking out. Of course, I already messed something up. Oh yeah. Well, be nice if I did it correctly. Okay, perfect. So now everything should have the appropriate data types. That looks a lot better. So now we have true or false, text, so on and on. So we're going to go back into the advanced editor, and then we're going to add a new column. Add a new column that will be the result of our function call. So I'm going to call this grab the request equals table, add column, type cleanup is the table I want to pass through. The name of the column is going to be called request result, request underscore result. The next step is going to be the column generator. I'm going to say for each row in my table, I'm going to call my grab the request function, or sorry, what is it? Damn it. Request function. Request function, and I want to pass through the URL link field. So basically the URL link column. This should return back a table object. This pops up, so just disregard it and just go through it with whatever you need. It's because I'm making API requests, so it's freaking out. Okay, so this looks a lot better. So we can now see we've made a request for each one, and you can see that because the data is changing as I'm going down. But we now just did a bulk API request in Power Query. If that doesn't excite you, I'm just gonna say, what's wrong? And then from here, it's really kind of just cleaning up more than anything. I'll just show it to you really quickly. Again, it just simply because it's really basic operations that we've already talked about. I'm just going to copy and paste it, and then we'll just walk through a little bit about, what each step is doing. So because we now have a table object in that particular column, we're going to expand it. So we use the expand table column. The input is the table from the previous step. And then we're going to specify the column that we want to expand. Well, in this case, it's the request result. And then we need to specify the column names and then the new column names if there are any. So in this situation, they're exactly the same, but it's just, there to show you that this is what, it would look like. And then I basically do the same thing that I did before, which is I'm just going to clean up the data types simply because I just want everything to be clean and I'm a little bit OCD in that regard. So I do the same step that I was doing up here, which is I'm going to do the table.transform column types. I'm going to use the results from the previous step, and then I just did exactly what I did up above, which is you specify the column name, the data type that you want it to be, and you're good to go. So ideally, what we're going to now have is a massive table of a few hundred rows. Oh, it's because this one needs to be grab the request. So we can now see that we have basically a bulk data source, right? So, it can still technically be cleaned up a little bit simply because there's duplicates, but we can now see that we have each of the different resource URLs. So you could actually do it again if you wanted to. I'm not going to, simply because I don't want that many rows, but it's here to show you that you now have each one of the URLs for the next poll if you wanted to do it. So with that being said, I am going to kind of cut off this particular video. We have one more video we need to cover, and that's simply showing you how to take your data and putting it into a JSON string that you could then load into Python or wherever you want it to. Again, it's just more for demonstration purposes. There's not really necessarily an intent behind this, but just showing you, hey, this is just an easy way of doing it, and it's maybe some advantages and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, by all means, put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video, which is going to be a quick one.